On March 12, 1930, in the quiet, dusty ashram of Sabarmati, something extraordinary began. A frail, bespectacled man, dressed only in a simple homespun dhoti, rose to lead a procession. He was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, then 60 years old. His destination, a remote coastal village over 240 miles away. His weapon, a handful of salt. This was not an armed rebellion. This was not a military campaign. This was the Salt March, or the Dandi March, as it is also known. A seemingly absurd act of defiance against one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen, the British Raj, which controlled nearly a fifth of the global population and vast swaths of India. The British monopoly on salt, an essential commodity for every Indian household, was not merely an economic burden, it was a symbol of colonial oppression. Every grain of salt consumed by an Indian citizen was taxed by the British, making a basic necessity into a tool of imperial control. Gandhi's declaration was simple, yet revolutionary. He would break the salt law, peacefully, openly, and invite every Indian to do the same. The world watched, skeptical, as this small man walked day after day, drawing thousands into his nonviolent vortex. This march, initially dismissed as a foolish stunt by the British Viceroy Lord Irwin, evolved into a global phenomenon. It exposed the moral bankruptcy of colonialism, energized the Indian independence movement like never before, and ultimately set in motion the irreversible collapse of the British Empire. A single pinch of illicit salt would ultimately shake an empire to its very foundations. To understand the Salt March, we must first understand the man who conceived it. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born in Porbandar, Gujarat, in 1869. Educated in London as a lawyer, his defining political and spiritual awakening occurred in South Africa. In South Africa, he witnessed and experienced firsthand the brutal realities of racial discrimination and colonial injustice against Indians. It was there, through decades of struggle against segregationist laws, that he developed his unique philosophy of satyagraha, truth force, or soul force. Satyagraha was not passive resistance. It was active, nonviolent civil disobedience designed to confront injustice through moral courage and self-suffering, thereby appealing to the conscience of the oppressor. It was a weapon of the strong, not the weak. Returning to India in 1915, Gandhi quickly rose to prominence within the Indian National Congress. He transformed it from an elite talking shop into a mass movement, speaking to the common villager, introducing the simple hand-spun khadi cloth as a symbol of self-reliance and resistance to British textiles. By the late 1920s, India was chafing under British rule. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre of 1919, where British troops under General Reginald Dyer fired on unarmed civilians, killing hundreds, had irrevocably poisoned relations. The demand for Swaraj, self-rule, was growing louder. Gandhi, the spiritual leader, was now poised to become the strategic architect of India's freedom. Why salt? Of all the injustices of British rule, why choose a common household condiment as the symbol of defiance? The answer lies in its universality and its profound economic impact. Since the 19th century, the British Raj had enforced a strict monopoly on salt production and distribution in India. This meant that Indians were forbidden from collecting or making their own salt, even from naturally occurring deposits or seawater. All salt had to be purchased from British-controlled salt works, heavily taxed. The Salt Act was insidious. Salt was not a luxury, it was a fundamental necessity, particularly in India's hot climate, where manual labor led to significant perspiration and the need to replenish electrolytes. It was essential for human health, for preserving food, and for livestock. The tax on salt disproportionately affected the poorest segments of Indian society. While the tax itself might seem small, for millions living on the brink of subsistence, it was a significant burden. This tax was a constant, daily reminder of their colonial subjugation. Gandhi understood that the salt law was not just an economic injustice, but a moral outrage. It was a tax on life itself. By choosing to defy this particular law, he aimed to ignite a campaign that would resonate with every single Indian, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest peasant. It was a stroke of genius, turning an everyday item into a potent symbol of imperial tyranny. Before embarking on the march, Gandhi, true to his principles of satyagraha, made an extraordinary gesture. On March 2, 1930, he sent a letter to the British Viceroy of India, Lord Irwin. The letter was a detailed, meticulously argued plea for British withdrawal from India and an end to oppressive policies, including the salt tax. Gandhi offered the Viceroy a chance to avert civil disobedience, outlining his intention to break the salt law if his demands were not met. He even described his plan to walk to the sea and make salt. Viceroy Irwin, a man of aristocratic background and stiff colonial pride, considered the letter insulting. He dismissed Gandhi as an agitator and the proposed salt march as a ridiculous, almost childish stunt. He believed that the idea of a mass protest against a salt tax was simply beneath the dignity of the British Empire. His official response was dismissive, stating that the British government cannot comply with your demands. Irwin's underestimation of Gandhi and the power of nonviolent civil disobedience would prove to be one of the greatest miscalculations in British imperial history. Gandhi, upon receiving the Viceroy's dismissive reply, declared, "On bended knees I asked for bread, and I received stone instead." The stage was set. The invitation to negotiate had been rejected. The path to Dandi and to confrontation was now inevitable. On the morning of March 12, 1930, Gandhi, then 60 years old and weighing just over 100 pounds, began his march from the Sabarmati ashram in Ahmedabad. He was accompanied by 78 carefully chosen satyagrahis, disciples representing various castes, religions, and regions of India. The initial procession was small, disciplined, and solemn, but as they walked through villages, news spread like wildfire. Peasants, villagers, and townsfolk lined their route, offering food, water, and shelter. The numbers swelled. Gandhi's daily routine during the march was meticulous. He walked for about 10 to 12 miles a day, holding prayer meetings, giving speeches, and addressing the growing crowds. His messages were simple: embrace nonviolence, defy the salt law, and boycott British goods. The march was not just a physical journey, it was a potent act of political theater. Every step was documented by Indian and international press. The world saw the image of a frail old man leading his people against the might of an empire. The Viceroy and his administration were initially perplexed. Should they arrest Gandhi? Arresting him too early might turn him into even greater a martyr. Letting him continue, however, allowed the movement to gain unstoppable momentum. They chose, unwisely, to let him walk. As the Salt March progressed over 24 days, covering approximately 240 miles from Sabarmati to Dandi, it captured the imagination of the entire world. Journalists, photographers, and newsreel camera operators flocked to India. American newspapers, initially skeptical, began running daily reports. Publications like Time magazine put Gandhi on its cover. The imagery was powerful, the simple dhoti-clad man walking with his followers against the backdrop of colonial power. It became a global symbol of resistance against tyranny, inspiring civil rights movements and anti-colonial struggles far beyond India's borders. It put the moral legitimacy of the British Empire directly into question on the world stage. Within India itself, the effect was electrifying. Lakhs of people, hundreds of thousands, began to identify with Gandhi's cause. As he neared the coast, the ranks of his followers swelled to thousands, marching in solidarity. The British authorities, initially dismissive, now found themselves in an impossible position. Every move they made or didn't make was scrutinized.
The narrative of the humble freedom fighter versus the oppressive colonial power was undeniable, and the world was watching. On the morning of April 6, 1930, after 24 arduous days of walking, Gandhi and his followers reached the coastal village of Dandi. The crowd was immense, estimated to be in the tens of thousands. At 6:30 a.m., after a ritual bath in the Arabian Sea, Gandhi walked to a patch of muddy sand, stooped down, and picked up a lump of salty mud. He held it aloft, a simple, symbolic gesture that defied the might of the British Empire. This small act of illicit salt-making was his direct violation of the Salt Act. He declared, "With this, I am shaking the foundations of the British Empire." The signal was given. Across India, millions responded. The act was replicated everywhere. Indians collected natural salt from the sea, made salt in their backyards, or purchased contraband salt openly. Women, often relegated to domestic roles, came out in unprecedented numbers, participating in the defiance, picketing liquor stores, and organizing boycotts. The British response was predictable: mass arrests. Over 60,000 Indians were arrested in the ensuing weeks, including Jawaharlal Nehru and other prominent Congress leaders. But the jails overflowed, and the movement only grew stronger, fueled by the British repression. The most brutal chapter of the Salt Satyagraha unfolded not at Dandi, but at the Dharasana Salt Works, located about 150 miles north. Gandhi had planned a non-violent raid on the heavily guarded salt works, but he was arrested on May 5, 1930, just days before the planned action. The leadership of the raid fell to Abbas Tayabji, and then, after his arrest, to Sarojini Naidu, the famous Indian poet and freedom fighter. On May 21, 1930, a column of 2,500 unarmed satyagrahis marched on Tarasana, attempting to seize the salt deposits. What followed was a horrifying display of colonial brutality. Indian policemen, under British command, descended upon the nonviolent marchers with steel-tipped lathis, batons. Marchers would walk forward, be beaten to the ground, and then be carried away by stretcher-bearers, only for the next column to step forward. The scene was witnessed by American journalist Webb Miller of the United Press, whose dispatch sent shockwaves around the world. Miller wrote, "Not one of the marchers even raised an arm to fend off the blows. The ground was caked with blood." He described it as a sickening whir of clubs on unprotected skulls. Miller's report, published globally, exposed the true violent face of British imperialism. It galvanized international opinion against the Raj and solidified Gandhi's image as a moral giant leading a righteous struggle. The brutality at Tarasana, coupled with the ongoing mass civil disobedience, forced the British government to reconsider its rigid stance. The international condemnation was too severe, and the administrative burden of mass arrests and overflowing jails was unsustainable. In January 1931, the British Viceroy Lord Irwin, who had once dismissed Gandhi as an extremist, initiated direct talks with him. After weeks of intense negotiations, the Gandhi-Irwin Pact was signed on March 5, 1931. The pact was a landmark agreement. The British agreed to release all political prisoners arrested during the Salt Satyagraha, allow the collection of salt along the coast, and lift some restrictions on public gatherings. In return, Gandhi agreed to suspend the civil disobedience movement and attend the Second Round Table Conference in London to discuss India's future constitutional reforms. While not achieving immediate independence, the pact marked a crucial shift. For the first time, the British government negotiated with Gandhi as an equal, acknowledging the Indian National Congress as a legitimate political force representing the aspirations of millions. Gandhi's attendance at the Round Table Conference, though ultimately unsuccessful in achieving Swaraj, cemented his status as a global leader. He met with Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald and captivated the British public, despite remaining in his simple dhoti in London's elite. The empire, however reluctantly, was now facing its moral reckoning. The Salt March did not immediately win India independence, but its impact was profound and irreversible. It demonstrated the immense power of nonviolent civil disobedience as a tool against colonial oppression. It mobilized millions of ordinary Indians, particularly women, into political action, fostering a sense of national unity and purpose that transcended caste and creed. The Salt Satyagraha instilled courage and conviction in the Indian masses. Globally, it exposed the inherent injustice and brutality of British rule, eroding the moral authority of the empire and significantly altering international public opinion. It served as a direct inspiration for future civil rights movements, most notably the African American civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States decades later. For Britain, the Salt March was a turning point. It became undeniably clear that continued rule over India would require ever-increasing repression and force, which was both morally indefensible and economically unsustainable in a post-World War II world. The march accelerated the timeline for Indian independence. In 1947, just 17 years after Gandhi picked up that pinch of salt, India gained its independence. The Salt March remains a testament to the extraordinary power of an idea, a symbol, and the unwavering will of a people led by a man who proved that sometimes the greatest strength lies not in the sword, but in a simple, defiant walk. The humble act of making salt ultimately dissolved the foundations of an empire.